We are going to spend a few minutes this morning talking about resources. Dr. Gilpin, in the earlier session, provided much of the context for our discussion. But I want to zero in on one important fact. When we talk about resources in the African context, one of the most frequent things that people say is that there are no resources. We lack resources. We want more resources. But we often fail to recognize that Africa is not poor, far from being poor. In fact, Africa is quite wealthy. Africa is very well endowed with resources. But still, we keep talking about Africa as if we were poor. Africa is not poor. The resources are there. And the evidence is there. There are workshops and conferences going on in London and other places that give us evidence that, indeed, Africa is not poor. The main challenges that I have on the board, again, Dr. Gilpin and others have dealt with the challenge of development, the challenges of security, the challenges of strategic planning. What I wanted to do this morning is to address some of the other issues pertaining to resources, whether we're talking about availability of resources, their affordability, how we allocate them, how we utilize them, and the mechanisms we have in place to ensure that those resources are spent wisely, they're spent judiciously. So, what is it that we're talking about? When we talk about security resources, we are talking about that portion of a society's resources that are utilized to achieve security, both in terms of managing internal and external threats. This is basically what we are talking about when we look at resources in the security sector. As I said, I will spend some time talking about some of the factors that we did not spend a lot of time discussing here in this workshop, beginning with resource availability. How do we mobilize resources? There are really basically two ways. Ideally, we would focus on our own internal resources, how we mobilize resources internally, how our economy functions to produce sufficient wealth for us to utilize for our security means, for our security needs. Well, fortunately, we also have the availability of external resources. But in this seminar, we problematized the issue of the availability of external resources because of some of the costs associated with those resources. So availability is one. The second aspect that we need to look at is affordability, basically pertaining to the balance between ends and means. If we have very ambitious ends and the resources are not there, then the equation is out of balance. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that wants are unlimited. Wants are unlimited, and resources are always scarce. Resources are always scarce. So it's really very important that we strike that balance right. And one of the ways to do that is by determining what is it that we can afford. What can we afford? And one of the things that we need to zero in on is the priorities. What is it that we must prioritize? Given a certain resource envelope, what is it that we need to prioritize? We cannot do everything, especially not everything at once. So prioritizing is really of essence. I want to spend, number 3, some time looking at how we allocate our resources to attain our strategic objectives, to achieve our strategic end state. How do we allocate our resources? And here, let me focus on budgeting. Let me focus on budgeting, and let me share with you the principles of budgeting. For many of you, this is just a refresher. But it's important that every so often we focus on the principles of budgeting. First and foremost is comprehensiveness. That means that off-budget expenditures, parallel budgets, when your external friend, when your external partner allocates some money to you and tells you, look, this is how you have to use this money. This is basically tantamount to a parallel budget, highly discouraged. We need to be disciplined. We need to be disciplined. We need to adhere to the resources allocated to us. The budget allocations need to be adhered to. We need to make sure that we do not go beyond what has been allocated to us. The issue of legitimacy, also of critical importance, in the sense that those who set policy must represent the people, must represent the sovereign. Flexibility is also of essence. We are seeing this in many African countries, currently having to make course corrections because what they had in mind, some of the parameters they thought they would have to work with have changed. Based on available information, based on changed realities, it's okay to make course corrections. Predictability pertains to macroeconomic stability and also the stability in the strategic policy framework is also of critical importance. I also want to touch on contestability. This is important especially for us who work in the security sector. Yes, the security sector is special, but there are many other special sectors. There are many other special sectors. So we need to keep in mind that all sectors will be treated equally. And for us in the security sector, we have to make a case. We have to make a case that out of all of the scarce resources out there, we deserve a certain portion. we deserve a certain, we need to make a case, we need to articulate, you need to, in fact, have a narrative, a convincing narrative as to why scarce societal resources should be dedicated to us. Because, of course, there's an opportunity cost. There's an opportunity cost. We can spend quite a bit of time talking about that opportunity cost. All of those resources that come to the security sector could be used in other sectors. Could be used for education, healthcare, infrastructure building, and so on and so forth. So when resources are allocated to us, these are resources that are not allocated to others. So that really speaks to the necessity for us to be very judicious in how we spend the resources that are allocated to us. Honesty is another critical point, especially when we are talking about budgets. Especially when we are talking about budgets. Especially when we are talking about budget projections. Again, Africa is providing us quite a bit of good evidence of countries countries tinkering with their budgets when conditions change. Countries like Nigeria, countries like Angola, for example, that made budget projections counting on the price of oil to be at a certain level. Now the price of that commodity has collapsed, has dropped dramatically. You see countries like Angola, countries like Nigeria, countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo making adjustments. And it's very good to see that happening. Transparency. Transparency in the budgetary process is very important. The budget should be a public document. In fact, the budget should be the law of the land once the legislature actually passes it. So decisions should be shared with the public. And in fact, we should welcome scrutiny because of the issue of accountability. The issue of accountability. Those who are in charge of resources must be accountable to the people. Must be accountable to the people. So let me begin to conclude basically by touching on this issue of how we utilize the resources. You have the budget is approved, monies are appropriated to you. Well, that is an important step, but it's only the first step. The next steps, how we use those resources, are of critical importance. And we need to use those resources efficiently. We need to use those resources effectively. To do so, we need to have processes in place that enable us to monitor how we go about utilizing those resources, that enable us to evaluate how we are performing in the utilization of those resources. The tools are there, and we need to utilize them. Well, there are some challenges in how we go about utilizing resources. Oftentimes, we don't have the personnel, the quality and number required to do so. Often, the processes for auditing, the processes for evaluating how we are doing our work are not in place. Sometimes they're weak, sometimes they're deficient. Oftentimes we have weak mechanisms that enable us to feed the results of that assessment, of that evaluation into future plans. And oftentimes the relationship with the legislature is not as good as it should be. But be that as it may, it's important that the oversight mechanisms be in place. Whether we're talking about Parliament, whether we're talking about civil society organizations, the media, and so on. So really, to conclude now, I'll go back to one of the key themes that has run through this seminar. The dual or the twin challenges between security and development, the twin challenges of security and development. The demands for development on our continent are growing, and they will continue to grow. The challenges are there for all of us to see. The resources are there, but the challenges of managing those resources are really, really great, and we need to address them. If we do not do that, if we do not manage our resources effectively, efficiently, judiciously, then we will have a very, very difficult time in addressing both the development challenges and the security challenges. So, in other words, we have no choice. We really have no choice. Our only choice is to manage our resources well. Thank you for listening.